Kezia Dugdale, welcome to the programme. Thank you very much for joining me. Just first of all, initially, your reaction not only to the Angela Rayner story, but the pornography being viewed on the front bench that David was speaking about.
Well, of course, shocked at what Angela Rayner has had to experience, but not hugely surprised. And this is the type of thing that happens in a political culture where you have at the moment 56 different members of parliament being investigated for sexual harassment. There's some sort of enabling culture in politics, both in Scotland and across the United Kingdom, which creates the environment now where allegedly somebody can sit on the front bench of the House of Commons and watch pornography during live proceedings. And it's absolutely outrageous, and we have to now accept once and for all that misogyny is endemic across our politics and look to take some serious action to address it so that more women look towards politics rather than away from it. I'm deeply worried that stories like this that we've seen this week might turn women off careers and vocations in politics when they have so much to contribute.
Exactly. We'll pick up on that in a second. But firstly, you've been in and around politics for a long time. But given these stories happening, these two stories in the course of a week, really, are you quite shocked and surprised at how things still are in a way?
You know, I've been reflecting a lot about this, Andrew, and I've been active in politics and certainly in driving up women's representation in elected life for well over a decade now. And for a long time, I used to think the answer was that it would all just get better if there were more women in politics. And I would argue for gender quotas and try and increase the number of women in parliament in the hope that the critical mass of women in elected positions would, in its own, change the nature of the culture that existed. And now, whilst I think that having high levels of female representation is, of course, extremely important, it's not enough. And what we've got is the overrepresentation of men in politics. And I think far too many of them are still prepared to be bystanders, to accept this culture, because ultimately it works for the status quo, because it consolidates power in the hands of the people that wield it. And that still increasingly is male, pale men.
And so we heard a lot of warm words from a lot of these men when it came to this story. I was looking at Angela Rayner's face in the House of Commons today as well. She looked, quite crestfallen in a sense. She is a victim in all of this. So what can men do to help change that culture?
Well, on the one hand, she's a victim, and she's a victim of a very specific story, but it's also her power and agency and strength, which means that we're talking about it today. And the reality is her seniority allowed her that voice and that agency to speak out and say this is unacceptable. There are far too many other women in politics working for politicians at a lower level in their careers who couldn't dream of speaking out about their own experiences because of the price that they would pay in terms of their career trajectory. And it's that that's got to change, because too often if women speak out, if they're the ones that have to report, if they're the ones that have to take the action, they can't be part of those teams, those networks that they need to be a part of in order to progress in their careers. So I think for every modern man that's outraged at what Angela Rayner has experienced this week, we need to see some action, because inaction is now culpability. It's complicity. It's about accepting things as they are rather than how they should or could be.
And that brings us back to how do we get more young women into politics? How do we get female candidates? Because in some places in Scotland, it is quite a struggle. And you've just been pointing out, actually, that many women are probably quite concerned about going into politics. How do we make the atmosphere acceptable and safe?
So we don't yet know how many female candidates, let alone councillors, we're going to have after the next local government elections. But at the last set of elections, it was 29%, which is far lower than both the Scottish Parliament and the House of Commons. Now, that was in part because the SNP stood high numbers of female candidates and did very well at the last election. It's hard to see the SNP doing better than they did in 2017. So I think broadly we're going to have the same number of female councillors after the next election in a week or so's time. That, for me, suggests that very little is going to change, and we have to work an awful lot harder encouraging women towards roles in politics and in public service. Part of that is about defending representative democracy, saying to women, despite what you'll face, it is worth it. It is a noble vocation. You'll be able to achieve amazing things. But beyond that, we have to improve the culture that they're expected to go into. That's a challenge for institutions like parliaments, it's a challenge for political parties, and it's a challenge for every single individual who's active in politics and using their voice, just to check and correct the language that they use, to work out where that balance is between acceptable and unacceptable dialogue is. That's all part of the answer, but there's an awful lot more we need to do social media is a big part of it as well, of course.
I don't want to end on a negative note, I suppose, but are you concerned about the Mail on Sunday's story, in a sense about you speaking about the power and agency of Angela Rayner, and this was a story that was put there perhaps to take her down, maybe some MP thinking that he could take her down a peg or two, probably in their view?
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind about that. And I worry a little bit that such a big story could be carried off an anonymous source quote. You know, it's be a very different debate we'd be having this week if we knew who that MP was, and hopefully we might yet. But today you've got that same paper doubling down on the story, suggesting that Angela Rayner laughed and joked about it, you know, in a comedian's interview in recent times. Well, find me a woman that hasn't attempted to use humour to defend or deflect from the experiences that they've had facing harassment and this type of misogyny. And let's also remember, this isn't just about Angela Rayner's gender, it's about her class too. And those two interrelated, intersectional issues give some people who want to take her down an awful lot of collateral.
Well, that's been really interesting to speak to you. Kezia Dugdale from the John Smith Centre, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you indeed.